This Falcons offense is finally starting to come around.
This is the Atlanta Sports Party, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome into the Atlanta Football Party, or Sports Party, rather, your home for the best Atlanta sports talk. But why do I talk football? Because that's what we're going to do today. It's local insight. You can't get anywhere but right here at Locked On. I'm your host, Tenitra Batiste. Alongside me are Jarvis Davis and Maria Martin. So like I said, it is time for us to talk a little football. It has been an absolutely fantastic run for these Atlanta Falcons these last couple of weeks. I know here on the Sports Party, on the Atlanta Football Party, we talked about what our expectations were with this team in that gauntlet of the first 6 games, right? So here we are. The Falcons stand at 4-2. They stand atop their division and literally have gone 1, 2, 3, and really made a statement in the NFC South. So Jarvis, when you look at that run and how the Falcons have built over these last couple of weeks, what do you think is the biggest factor for them finding themselves at 3-0 in the division?
The offense finally came around because that's what this team was built on, right? I know that they traded for Matthew Judon. They brought in Justin Simmons right before training camp, but those are just pieces, right, that kind of help, get the defense where they need to be. But all the money, all the draft capital was put in this offense, and for it to be successful in driving this team so the defense can be able to rush the passer later on in games because they're putting up 30-plus points. And they'll put up 30-plus points in the last 2 games. So I feel like the offense finally came around. I feel like Zac Robinson is really starting to get into a groove. He's starting to understand how Tyler Allgeier and Bijan Robinson work, and that can be a great tandem and be one of the best tandems in the NFL. So This offense finally came around, and Zac Robinson is starting to really get his footing in his first year as a play caller.
And I think that's a great point that you made, Jarvis, because Maria, when you look at the offense, you feel like it's really functioning on all cylinders, right? We're seeing some good protection from the O-line. I think even you tweeted out a couple of days ago and kind of did a spotlight on Matthew Bergeron and some of the protection that he gave right there at the goal line. We're also seeing, as JD mentioned, just some amazing running, nearly 200 yards collectively from the running back room. And then you're seeing Zac Robinson really understand how to use Drake London and how to use Kyle Pitts. I think we already kind of saw shades of that with Darnell Mooney and Ray McLeod. But yeah, I think it is all coming together on the offensive side of the ball, which has really made the difference these last couple of weeks.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely has. Yeah, for sure. And then you look back to the beginning of the year, and when you saw Zac Robinson's first game as a play caller against Pittsburgh, everybody was like, wait a second, this is the worst offensive play caller we've ever seen in the history of the NFL. And there's tendencies all over the place. And yeah, he's the worst. And now look at where we are. We're 6 games into the season, and everyone has completely turned and shifted their mindset. So just goes to show you that you can't really read too much into the first game of the season. And I knew that after they showed so much tendency, and it was well documented after game 1, we talked about it on this podcast, they were going to have to pivot and do a lot of things very differently offensively. They certainly have. It also goes to Kirk Cousins' credit. He needed to get comfortable within this offense, comfortable with his new pass catchers and just all the pieces that he has to work with, his offensive line. And I think he's done a really good job at slowly letting that develop, but also at a pretty nice pace as well, because even just setting that franchise record in game 5 and then getting a division road win, albeit it's Carolina, there's no easy games in the NFL. And so I think in order to do that, he even mentioned it on Wednesday, Kirk Cousins said that's what mature football teams do. This team looks very, very complete on offense, and they're finding new ways to win offensively, which I think is a really good sign. It's not just one-dimensional. They have the run working very well. And you mentioned some of those blocking schemes that they're working with. They're incredibly creative right now. The way that they use Charlie Warner as a true blocking tight end is as good as it gets. And he is so valuable in this offense. So using different pieces, Drake London in the run game, he's developing that part of his game. I mean, there's so many positive things. I think you're just going to continue to see it grow. It's really nice to watch.
Yeah, and I love that call out of Charlie Warner because blocking does matter.
Yeah, and looking at the tape, Maria, like the dude seeks out work.
Yes.
For those who don't understand that football terminology, the man wants to get it in. He wants to mix it up, and just the way he's just working up double team slips with Caleb McGarry, and then when he's doing a little half motion and going up in the line of scrimmage and tapping that defensive tackle so he can get him moving the way he wants him to go, and then slipping up all the way up to the linebacker or the safety, to kind of cut off a nice lane for Bijan Robinson to get up in there. It's so beautiful to watch. I don't know if you understand. I'm excited about this type of stuff because when you getting a man on a man and a tight end, a guy that's not necessarily, I know they don't really get asked to block that much in today's games, more so back in the day, right? But when you see a guy like that, it helps me understand. I even tweeted this out when I went back and watched the tape. It was just like, I understand why this dude was signed right before the season actually officially begun. Right up to Kirk, you know what I'm saying? So I'm just like, I totally understand. I get it. I totally understand. I get it. And Charlie Warner, this dude is well worth the money. Like it's looking really good right now as far as with the scouting department and going out and getting a guy like that.
Yeah, that was my whole MO on Wednesday, was to go around and ask about Charlie Warner, because I just don't think he gets talked about enough. And it's because he's a guy that's not going to pop out to you on the stat sheet. That's never been the way that he's played, even when he was with the 49ers. So I think asking all the players, what kind of, I guess, just, I don't know, like, are you starstruck by him a little bit when you see this? Like, what's your reaction? And even when I asked Bijan Robinson, I said, what does Charlie Warner do for what you guys are trying to do offensively? He just went, like, it's a good thing. He's the best thing. And Charlie Warner also told me, he said the best thing that he can ever do is watch those running backs have open lanes when he's creating them. And I just think what he does is so valuable. And he's someone that I think more people should pay attention to, because he's making this run game go.
Well, yeah, think about it. When we found out that the Falcons were going to part ways with Keith Smith, and we thought, okay, no more fullback, your first question was, okay, well, then where are you going to get that extra blocker? Because let's just face it, we all kind of whisper, send help when it comes to Caleb McGarry in certain situations. So to know that they finally have some help for him, and that really there's that one guy who's embracing it, that's a good look. So now we know, we talked about the gauntlet of the first 6 games. Now you've got kind of like a bucket of the next 5, starting with the Seahawks. Then we know that the Falcons are going to be at the Bucs versus the Cowboys, at the Saints, and at the Broncos. But first things first, let's talk about these Seattle Seahawks. Jarvis, they're coming to town Sunday. Benz is going to be rocking again, I am sure. But what do you think is going to be maybe that one key for you that'll be a key to their victory on Sunday, these Falcons?
I'm going to steal a quote from Raheem Morris in offseason. Run the damn ball. Like, you have to be able to continue to do that. Like, I understand the 509 yards passing, franchise record, all that stuff is all cute, y'all. But when it comes down to brass tacks and being able to establish yourself in front of your home crowd, you have to be able to run the football, because it's going to help your offense in so many ways. It's going to open up play action. It's going to, give your defense rest, because you're going to be able to sustain drives. If you popping off 4 and 5 yards a carry, you're talking about 3rd and 2 situations. Oh my gosh, that is an offensive coordinator's dream. It's a defense coordinator's nightmare to have to figure out what this offense is going to do in this 3rd and short situation. So I feel like them coming out, running the football, establishing themselves offensively, and saying, hey, we're going to beat you, and we're going to dominate you with you knowing what we're trying to do. And that's when you get to that point as an offense, that's when it starts to get scary.
Yeah, I liked what I saw in the team stats when I looked at the time of possession for the Falcons, 39 minutes, for the Carolina Panthers, just 21 minutes. And that is half the battle, Maria. You got to keep them off the field, that your opponent. And a big part of how you keep them off the field is run, wear that defense down. And especially if you start that way, even if it takes a minute to establish it, stick with it so that it at least shows that defensive coordinator, hey, there's a variety of weapons that we have over here and a variety of ways we can work on this field when you give us the chance.
Yeah, I mean, remember in the beginning of the year, we were talking about how the Falcons were not very good on 3rd down offensively. That's because they were in 3rd and long, 3rd and unmanageable situations. It's kind of like what Jarvis was just talking about. And it's also because they weren't running the football as successfully as they had against Carolina. That game is a game you certainly want to build upon. You can mix it up and be balanced. I mean, that's every offensive coordinator's goal, is to be balanced in a game. But to establish the run, I think, is going to be critical in this game, because you don't want to give Geno Smith time. I mean, mean, what the Seattle Seahawks have been doing offensively, I think is really impressive. Geno doesn't get enough credit for just what he's done throughout his career. But the tricky thing about the Seahawks right now, and I think the good thing when we're talking about tricky for the Falcons, is that even Mike McDonald, he said that they are finding new ways to lose. That's a good thing for the Falcons because they have some things that they're trying to figure out. So establish the run, make sure you get ahead in those third and short situations that Jarvis is talking about, where you can be more successful on third down versus third and medium, third and long. Those things are harder to come back from. So give Tyler Allgeier the ball. You know what the announcer says in the stadium? What does he say? He says, like, give Tyler the ball or whatever. That's exactly how I feel. Tyler Allgeier is one of the angriest runners I've ever seen play football. Just having
angry
him
Allgeier.
valuable. Literally, he won the Angry Scepter from NFL Network, which I thought was great. The Angry Run Scepter. But yeah, give him the ball, give Bijan Robinson the ball. And I just think that is how you're going to be successful on Sunday.
Absolutely. So like you said, with the Seahawks, it'll be interesting to see which way they go in terms of how they want to run their offense and what they're going to present as a problem potentially to Jimmy Lake and this Falcons defense. We'll talk about that on the other side. This episode of our Atlanta Sports Party is brought to you by Game Time, which has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets easier for you for your favorite live events. So if you're someone like me who really likes user-friendly websites or user-friendly apps, this is for you because it takes all those filters out and all that fluff that'll show you the incredible deals right when you go in. So think about this. It's an easier way to save, whether it's a game in case you want to get some last minute tickets to Falcons versus Seahawks, or I hear Ursher is going to be in town this weekend, and maybe you could pick up a last minute ticket through the Game Time app. Also, you get a panoramic view of your seat, so it gives you a better idea of exactly where that seat is before you have to make the choice. And they'll give you credit for 110% of the difference if you happen to find a lower priced ticket. So download the Game Time app, go ahead and create an account if you don't already have one, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Again, that is Game Time app. Create that account so that when you go to it, you can use the code LOCKED ON for $20 off your first purchase. Now, terms do apply, but again, create the account and redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today because what time is it? It's game time. Okay, guys, we have talked about it, whether you want to talk about bend, don't break, or whether you want to talk about, hey, you're getting close, but you're not closing out enough in terms of getting the quarterback on the ground. So there are still some challenges that Jimmy Lake has facing him, and now he's facing this Seahawks offense. So for you, Maria, when you kind of look back at what this defense has been, especially in a couple of weeks, and we know, granted, that they've had some guys banged up, some are coming back, some are going off. So we take that caveat into consideration. But ultimately, what do you want to see from Jimmy Lake in terms of what he needs to do in his concerns about the Seahawks offense?
Well, I think the obvious answer would be to rush the passer. I mean, when you're dead last in the NFL with sacks, and it's got to come from somewhere. And you hear Grady Jarrett continuously say it's going to happen, and then the floodgates will open. And I know they're frustrated with the question, but it's a valid question. Whenever you have 5 sacks total on the year, it is not looking like it's trending in the right direction at all. They're only blitzing about 20% of the time, and yet they're still not getting after the quarterback. I mean, something has to change. Now, granted, they've switched things around defensively when it comes to their scheme, right? Last year, they were more 4-3. Now they're 3-4. And so getting used to that scheme and some of those new pieces, that does take a little bit of time, but there shouldn't be a reason why we're talking about this team being dead last when it comes to rushing the passer, especially when, as you had mentioned earlier, you go out, you trade for Matthew Judon. The production that we talked about for Matthew Judon on this show is not where it needs to be. We were so hyped up for him to get here, and yet he's still not getting home when it comes to getting to the quarterback. And it's weird because I kind of don't know why. He's definitely somebody who you would have thought would seen a little bit more production. I think the secondary has been a lot better than maybe people would have thought. They're very good at not giving up.
It's
for sure. And they're good at not giving up the explosive play, which Geno Smith does very well. Mike Hughes is a guy who everyone was down on last year. However, I think he's been one of the best players on this defense so far this year. So definitely getting after the quarterback. It's got to come sometime, and it's got to come from somewhere. So why not be Sunday? Especially because the Seattle Seahawks offensive line is their weakness of their team.
And you know what?
Think about it, Jarvis. I just want to pause for a hot second and talk a little bit about what Maria mentioned, which was Matthew Judon and what we're not seeing in some of those players. We talked about a guy like an Arnold Ebiketie, who absolutely needs to have a better year. We're seeing that they're bringing out Rukaroro a little bit more. But for you, Jarvis, I want to just kind of drill down a little bit more on some of those individual players where you need to see an uptick so that Jimmy Lake can actually utilize that defense and we can see better production from them overall.
I think it's a lot for me. It's a lot of not necessarily working your moves, because when you think about a lot of times in the NFL, like bull rushing takes a lot of effort and a lot of energy to consistently do that, right? Especially when it's come times to rush the passer. Aaron and I have had conversations about a lot of times the defense being in third and short situations, right? We talked about in the previous segment about how offensive coordinators love being in third and short because you have so many options. The playbook is wide open. So when you have those being in those situations, you know, it's really difficult to get home, because it's just like, if it's 3rd and 2, like, you know how long it takes to run a slant in the NFL? 1.2. 1.2 seconds. Nobody's getting home in 1.2. I'm sorry. I don't care who it is.
Yeah, we talked about that last week too.
Right. So when you have being in those situations, now in Carolina, we did see them force those things. They started getting some TFLs, started forcing Carolina, Andy Dalton in 3rd and long situations. And they were able to get off the field, but they weren't able to get home. But, you know, I even pointed out on the video I did, like, as far as how they need to rush more as a unit, because there was one particular time where James Smith-Williams and Taquan Graham had run a stunt, you know, and then Taquan Graham had outside containment as a defensive tackle because he had looped around. And he saw Andy Dalton kind of step up in the pocket, and he tried to reach inside to see if he can try to grab him. And I was like, dude, don't do that. As soon as he did that, Andy Dalton, runs out, resets his feet, and that was the pass that went for a first down against AJ Terrell on the right side of the sidelines play. So when you think about it from that aspect, and Rukaroro was right there. He was actually able to get a hit on, and a nice hit on if Taquan Graham holds what he got and the containment, keep him in the pocket, more than likely Rook was going to get home and he was going to sack the quarterback. And I feel like a lot of times when you get 1 or 2 sacks or 1.5 sacks or a sack and a couple hits on the quarterback, the conversation, the narrative changes, right? Because, you know, everybody in their mom was like, oh, who can they trade for and all that stuff. I'm like, there's some things they can do internally to get home. And they have to, especially when you don't have that individual player like you talked about with Matthew Judon, if he's not giving you what you need, they need to band together and figure out how to do it and just rush, keep your rush lanes. That is the most simplest thing that my defensive line coach ever told me. Stay in your lane.
I love that. And look, Jarvis, it brings a new meaning to stay in your lane.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
no doubt.
I think, you know, when you look at it as well, Maria, a lot of people have been kind of pontificating on, should Terry Fontenot consider maybe going out to and you know, Terry is always looking, but the November 5th deadline is kind of looming. So the question becomes, should he go out and kind of look for anybody who could bring help on the defensive side of the ball? Or is it just that, hey, maybe a little bit like the offense, where the offense kind of started here and kind of ascended. Maybe the defense kind of started high and kind of dropped off a little bit. Do you think they just need to reset with who they have, or does Terry need to kind of start making those calls about getting somebody else in here?
It's a loaded question because there's a lot of things. There's a lot of things that indicate this, and this is more of like a politically correct answer. But like when you go out when you go out and you look at the market, that's going to indicate what he does, honestly. I don't think it really has anything to do with the roster, because can you always add to your team? Yeah, I always believe that. You should never say, yeah, we're good, we don't need anything. That's not how the NFL works. And especially when you're trying to win and host a playoff game, go further than that. I mean, you do need a more... Yeah, you need a more complete team. You can always add to your team. I hate when people are like, oh, no, they don't need anything. What do you mean? Everybody always needs something, just at what cost, and does it really make sense? I know that Haason Reddick has been thrown out there for this team. I have a hard time believing that he would be a good fit for this team in particular. Now, he's an incredible player. Don't get me wrong. I think he completely changes the way that a defense operates. However, they are so big on culture, and they are so big on who these players and people are. And Haason has had issues with now multiple teams. And so, that's what I mean. At what cost do you add these people in? And then there's some other guys that you could add that are maybe a tick lower, a lower tier than Haason Reddick, that could make sense for the Falcons defense. When you see this offense rolling at the clip that they are, and you're looking around thinking, they may be able to score enough to keep up with anybody when you're thinking about later in the year and then potentially the playoffs. It's the defense that is the most concerning aspect of this team. And so if I'm Terry Fontenot, I want to make sure something does make sense, because you did give a lot up for Matthew Judon. And yes, he's not giving you the production at the moment. That could change at any given time. However, this is a week-to-week and immediacy league. You have to win, and you have to win very quickly, because if you don't take these opportunities now, 4-2 is great, and it looks awesome right now, but that could quickly change into something very different, as we all know, and those of us that have watched Falcons football over the last couple of years. So I think, it's kind of a politically correct answer, but we'll see what the market gives. I think you can always add, and certainly if you can get help when it comes to the pass rush, why not take it if it makes sense and not giving up too much for your team?
Yeah, well, I don't think it's a politically correct answer, Maria, because I think you make a great point. Yes, there's probably always a need on 31 of 32 teams on any given day. And you also know that the Falcons don't play about their culture. And there are some questions about whether or not it's Haason Reddick, like you're the common denominator. So whether or not it's him. But then I think on the same token, just kind of going back to what I was saying earlier, Jarvis, I know that you are a big fan of Nate Landman and what he can bring to the table. So we talked about him and coming back and what he can add. Also, we talked about earlier in the week, where's the defensive front other than Grady Jarrett? Like, what's going on with David Onyemata? Like, what's really going on up front? So that's why I was thinking as well, is it an uptick maybe that needs to happen there? Or is it something where Terry Fontenot is maybe looking and there's someone out there who they need to get? I mean, which way do you kind of defer?
To be honest with you, as far as the David Onyemata situation, that's one guy that I've noticed that his play has not necessarily been what it was last year.
Exactly.
I'm not saying he's declining, but I'm just saying it's not what he gave us in his first year with his team. So that's why I feel you've seen Ruka Rororo. Like, he started off in games in those third down situations. It's been him, Grady, Matthew Judon, and then on the Ebiketie, or sometimes James Smith-Williams, depending on the situation, right? So for me, I feel like that's where you have that internal fix, right? So you bring the young pup in, like, okay, let's see what you got. He's come in, he's been solid. So that's why you see him rotating in early on in games with David Onyemata. But as far as this edge player goes, I'm always at the point where if you can get better, go ahead and do it. Do what you got to do. Make the phone call. But try to fix what you have internally as well. Like, that doesn't stop that, right? So two things can be true at the same time in this particular situation. Yes, true. Can you get better internally? Yes, absolutely. Can you get better externally? And should you be making phone calls? Absolutely. So I think that this is where everybody needs to figure out ways to get better. So because they have been able to fix some things internally from the interior defensive line, you've seen that, and now it's time to get all these guys together and say, hey, guys, we need to stay in your lane,
let's
fix
this from the inside out.
Yeah. And so, so there you go. Yep.
Yeah. And so you look at what's coming up next, big game over the weekend for the Dogs. Obviously, they believe themselves, but is there some poster board, bulletin board material out there for Kirby Smart to use so that he can outdo those Longhorns? We'll talk about it in Around the Metro. Hey guys, we are going into, man, I can't believe it. We're actually going into the 7th week of the NFL season. It is really, really crazy to think about, but the 7th week of the NFL season can still pay big dividends for you on FanDuel. So think about this. With America's #1 sportsbook, you might get a hunch in the middle of the game. Maybe the Falcons defense finally puts the quarterback on the ground. If Geno Smith's on the ground and you got a feeling that maybe they're going to uptick on their sacks, or you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play for that Falcons Seahawks game Sunday, and so much more on the same page where you actually place your bets. Get that. So you get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet on FanDuel. Again, that is $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. And again, if you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can go and check out the live stats. You can check out play-by-play, and you can do that all on the same page where you make your bet. So where do you do that? At FanDuel.com. Again, after you check out the Atlanta Sports Party, the next stop should be FanDuel.com, because FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook. Locked On Sports Atlanta is a place where you can come, and not just Locked On Sports Atlanta, but also Sports Today, where you can get free 24/7 sports streaming channels programmed for you each and every day. We bring you the biggest stories without all the noise. So Locked On Sports Today also brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on our YouTube channel or the free Amazon TV channel, Fires app, part of Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. So Jarvis, according to FanDuel, the line is actually moved, and now the Texas Longhorns are 4.5-point favorites over the Georgia Bulldogs. Now, like I said, we know that Kirby Smart is the master of using bulletin board material, and there's been some commentary, whether it's from the media, whether it's from Longhorns Nation, or whether it's from the Longhorns themselves, that might give a little bit of motivation. But I think the bigger question is this. This is a team in the Dogs that started off this season #1. And granted, they lost a heartbreaker to Alabama, but now they find themselves in the #5 position. And we've even heard from the players earlier this week that they don't buy into that. They don't feel like they're underdogs. They feel like they're just as good, especially on the defensive side of the ball. But do you feel like they're being underestimated?
I think they're just a little bit. You know what? To be honest with you, I don't feel like they're being underestimated. I feel like the Longhorns are being overestimated. If I said it, because here's the thing: like going back and looking at the Texas schedule, and the only SEC team that they played is Mississippi State. Georgia beat them, and Texas, of course, beat them. I think it only gave up 13 points, and then a lot of people. Right, and Oklahoma, yeah. I don't count them. Sorry.
You got to.
That's a Big 12 team until, at least they got to complete one season before I consider them an SEC team. Sorry. I'm just kind of where my head is right now. So I feel like, in beating Oklahoma and beating Mississippi State, I get that those are SEC wins on paper. But I just can't fathom why there is so much more hype for this Texas team. And I understand the whole Arch Manning thing. Quinn Ewers is supposed to be a Heisman candidate, and I know we're going to talk about that in a little bit, but I think that people are overestimating Texas a little bit, because have they really been tested? That's the question. We know Georgia has been tested. They, Kentucky, gave them a good run, and then the first half of that Clemson game, they gave them all they could handle, So and when you think about it from that aspect, I feel like I love going with battle-tested teams when you come to these big-time matchups like these. So, and then, of course, Alabama, they got punched all in the mouth and tried and came back for like probably 15 or 30 seconds, they had and to get a lead in that game. So I feel like the resiliency that this Georgia team has shown, I know they haven't lived up to expectations as far as with the offense get off the fast starts, but I feel like you got to give them a little bit more credit and a little less credit to Texas, because UTSA and doggone Colorado State, I'm just like, what are we talking about here? Who have they beat that you said, oh my gosh, that is the doggone team? And we thought Clemson was going to be going to tank, but shoot, they're in the top 10 too. So, that's looking like a better win that for Georgia, especially when it comes down playoff time. So I feel like people just need to relax.
Yeah.
Let Texas beat a real team. And if they beat Georgia this weekend, I give them all the credit they deserve, but I just think there's just a little bit too much hype coming into this game.
Maria, do you think that and I want to now use Jarvis's phrase, do you think that Georgia is being underestimated? Do you think that Texas is being quote unquote overestimated? Or do you feel like this is kind of right where it needs to be?
I think it's right where it needs to be. Sorry, Jarvis. I listened to that and I thought it was a great speech. And, I thought it was very well orchestrated. I also do think that you're right. I think that you look at Texas's schedule and people are overhyping them a bit when it comes to the opponents that they've beaten and the way that they've beaten them as well. Now, they did beat Michigan, which is a very good football team. Oklahoma is in the SEC, by the way, though they have not played up to the hype of, what people think as well. But Georgia, yeah, they're battle tested for sure. Although I do think Quinn Ewers is a lot better of a quarterback than people are giving him credit for. I am a Heisman Trophy voter, and so I know we're going to talk about the Heisman Trophy, and Quinn is a very good quarterback. And one of the things that I think, he's not as flashy as some of the other guys that are in the running for the Heisman Trophy, especially when it comes to the stats, but he's doing things to help his team win. And that is such a critical component to being a quarterback, is not allowing your team to lose. So not doing things to lose your team the game, but also helping them win. It's such an underrated thing when it comes to a quarterback, and Quinn does it very well. He orchestrates the offense well, and Texas is going to be so lit for this game. I mean, this is the biggest game on the planet. You've got Formula One in Austin this weekend. You've got a top 5 matchup. It's going to be insane. However, the 4.5 points is fine. I think that it is going to be a 1-score game regardless. And guess what? Kirby Smart, 19-9 in 1-score ball games in his career at Georgia. And going back to Jarvis's point about being battle tested, now's the time to prove that all of that stuff that people were yelling about is worth it. The fact that you got stomped on in Tuscaloosa in the first half of the game and came back and came to life and were able to almost win that game. And then, of course, you look at the Mississippi State second half and you're thinking, that defense better not do that against Texas, because they will run all over you and put up the points for sure. I think it's right where it needs to be at. I think it's going to be an electric atmosphere. I think it's going to be a 1-score game. I think it's going to come down to the final possession, who has it. These are two very good football teams. I'm ready to see who comes out on top.
Yeah, and real quick on the Heisman implication piece, I think it does have Heisman implications because this is an opportunity for Carson Beck to kind of re-enter the chat, and it's an opportunity for Quinn Ewers to bolster his consideration because, again, you're out for a couple of weeks due to injury. It's not any fault of your own, but it does kind of move you down the board, so to speak. So, JD, Maria, do you guys think as well that this is really a game that could have Heisman implications for both Beck and Ewers?
1,000%. This is, if you want to be in the Heisman conversation, this is the game you better play in, right? So I feel like this is, I talk about, 4 quarters focus for Carson Beck. Yeah, say that fast 3 times. I think this is right. It's an LC in there, like we don't need to play around with that on this show, right? but yes, to answer your question, T, I feel like this is the game that, Beck, if Beck wants to be in this conversation, if he wants to live up to that hype of being the number 1 overall pick, this is the game to do it. And he has to do it in this game or it's not going to matter.
Yeah, man, I'm right with you, Jarvis. And especially because when you look at previous Heisman Trophy winners, I vote. This is just how I vote, and everyone can vote however they want if they have a Heisman Trophy vote. I vote on full body of work. However, there's typically 1 or 2 games that solidify you the Heisman Trophy. And this is definitely one of those that you circle and you look back at and you say, how did you prevail in an atmosphere like that, in a game like that, in a place where you were tested? Did you win the football game for your team? Did you help them win, help them be successful, or did you help them lose it? And this is a game that certainly can indicate both of those things. And Carson Beck still, I get it. He hasn't lived up to the Heisman Trophy hype, but he's not been bad by any means. I don't think he's been good enough to win it yet, but we're still young into the season. There's still a lot of room to grow, but certainly you guys are both right. This is the game where if I'm Carson Beck, I go in there, I light it up in Texas and impress the Heisman Trophy voters. he certainly can make a very strong case for himself this weekend.
And you also want to impress the college football playoff committee, because this game has those implications, maybe more so than Georgia anything, because we talk about the possibility now that we have 12 teams that can get in, that you can have 2 losses and likely get in, especially if they're 2 losses and you're in the SEC. But you still want that second loss to be, if it's going to be a second loss, we hope not for Georgia, but it needs to at least be competitive. So I think it has implications, to you guys' points, not just for the Heisman race, but also to get into the college football playoff. Thanks to our everydayers for making the Atlanta Sports Party your first listen of the day. Be sure to stop by Locked On Hawks for your second listen. And of course, we're free and available wherever you download your podcast. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. We will see you on the Atlanta Football Party Monday.